Eddie Frederick has got it all. Inspiration, motivation, great advice, and biting opinion pieces as only Eddie Frederick can deliver. Eddie Frederick has got it all.
I take time and I write down all the things that I love on my island. Best believe the list gon' be like 5 miles long. Best love that makes me sing this song. The cleanest breeze on the waters. Friendly people meet in every corner. Togetherness and love is what we stand for. We stand for. Stand for. Oh, island in this sun. Look at how we've grown, how far we've run. 50 years we strong and more to come. More to come. More to come. I'm going higher. 50 years we're blessed with much fire. Still reaching for more. Going up, up, and more. Going up, up, higher. Going higher. As we aspire, build up ourselves, put people together.
Welcome to EDDIE-FICATION, made possible by the efforts of the Center for Democracy and Good Governance, CDGG. The Center for Democracy and Good Governance is a sound organization established to promote and strengthen democracy. For too long now, our generally perceived poorly educated electorate have fallen victim to the cheap and inferior propaganda of those seeking to hold others captive under the guise of democracy. Gladly, the CDGG uses EDDIE-FICATION to help to actively pursue a sustainable approach to reorient our people towards the importance of electing and selecting people of good character to public life. Through EDDIE-FICATION, we will highlight the importance of education appropriate to our development, proper healthcare and facilities as our right, respect for law and order, not to mention upgrading our people's thinking so they could become qualified participants in the democratic process to their advantage. After all, Grenada's national constitution makes allowances for the ideal of free men to enjoy freedom from fear and want, which can be best achieved if conditions are created whereby everyone may enjoy his economic, social and political, civil and cultural rights.
I want the best for my family, so every meal has to be perfect. Every bite has to say, There's no doubt in my mind that the best in frozen meats and vegetables has to come from the Country Cold Store. Hams, turkeys, sausages, beef, pork, chicken. I just don't know my family is in safe hands. Thank you, Country Cold Store, for being there for us for the past 40 years.
There are some interesting specials available at Country Cold Store's Mini Mart while stocks last. Take advantage of these specials as they assist you to stretch your limited funds.
The Country Cold Store, providing the best in frozen meats and vegetables since 1969.
Hurricane season is now upon us, so we as Caribbean people need to remember to think safety and be prepared. Avoid venturing outside during a storm or hurricane, especially if there are strong winds. Rooftops and other debris are often blown about and can cause great damage.
Attention all forward-thinking companies. Sure you can do with a continuous positive boost to your image and impact your bottom line. Hiring the right people with the right attitude and mindset is where to start. If you did not get it right through your current hiring methods, we can help develop the right mindset for your current employees. If you think training is expensive, try not training and you will experience a perpetual downward spiral in patronage on account of increased satisfied customers. Take things into your hands and engage the best at motivation and customer care training with a tried and tested track record. Visit www.efrederick.com now and learn how you can change the atmosphere in your business and improve the customer experience for everyone who does business with you. Spice Island Beach Resort and Belmont Estate are two such entities of world renown that have benefited tremendously from ongoing customer care, social skills, and motivation training. Training changes everything for the better for any business and every team member. Enhance employee performance through increased awareness and passion for the job at hand. Greater potential in your workforce awaits you through engaged, high-energy training that works. Log on now, www.EDDIE-FICATION.com.
Eddie Frederick has got it all. Inspiration, motivation, great advice, and biting opinion pieces as only Eddie Frederick can deliver. Eddie Frederick has got it all.
Wonderful, folks. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And of course, this is our 186th observance of emancipation. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our 228th edition of Edification, as we truly observe 86 years, since emancipation. As soon as you get all the pleasantries out of the way, as you reconnect with your edification community, please remember to share, comment, like, love, and just interact as you know how. Tag your friends whom you know or have reasons to believe would appreciate this knowledge-based program. Our number this week is 228, and according to the laws of the universe, seeing this number means that you need to believe in yourself. In times of doubt, your angels are asking you to trust in them to bring you to support your needs. You see, seeing angel number 228 is a sign that you need to believe and trust in yourself, reaffirming, of course, your inner strength and freeing yourself from doubt. And most times, these doubts are usually projected on you. It is easy to doubt yourself when you are easily distracted. Stay focused, folks, and scatter all the nonsense sent in your direction to take you off your course. As we are aware, several people have transitioned over the last week or so. And one that comes to mind is, of course, Lou Smith of local broadcast fame. We all know that they say a tree is best measured while laying down. What pity our society continues to sing the praises of people only when they are fallen. And while they were alive and falling before their very eyes, they did absolutely nothing to assist. You see, usually, the funeral of the fallen, we see people positioning themselves to be among the 6 pallbearers. Yet, while the fallen was alive and descending into the abyss of a miserable life, none of the 6 would be seen around to assist. We all too often hear people extol the virtues of the deceased, referring to them as mentor, coach, teacher, and what have you. Oh, to the popularity of hypocrisy among our people. That is why I am quite contented to be a loner, not caring for the fake love and attention of any of the shallow among us. May the souls of the fallen among us, to include that of Lou Smith, rest in eternal peace. Folks, I recall closing last week's edition as follows. Never apologize for having standards. You see, the beauty of standards is that it always exposes those who come to you with an agenda. Your emotional standards and spiritual awareness will always frustrate those who can't run game on you. It will always frustrate manipulators and anyone who otherwise operates with bombast and ego. You see, when you compromise your standards, you end up being easily deceived. To have standards is to be aware of your value. To have standards is to be aware that the universe has set your value to priceless. You see, the danger of allowing people to give you value or significance is to give them the power
to set your price. Don't settle for being on the clearance rack of a department store just to get the approval of others. Be the whole goddamn department store instead. If you are not willing to lose something because of your standard, trust me, folks, it's not a standard. Many times we have mislabeled victories because if we lost anything in the process of protecting our standards, we have found ourselves. And of course, we really won in the end. So stop living out of your lane. You remember that subject matter last week? You see, too many of us need to fix ourselves before we can properly offer ourselves to work in any collective grouping. The recent announcement of the separation of one cabinet minister from the cabinet of Prime Minister Deacon Mitchell has once again shown us up to be politically immature and goddamn ignorant. You see, the cabinet created, and by virtue of its guidelines, setting it up and giving it its life, it is a constitutional dictatorship. When everything is going according to plan, no one would know this, but as soon as something goes wrong with one of its members and confidence is lost in them, they have to be separated. Too many of us be contrary to the knowledge that the Prime Minister can act single-handedly in such decision. Every member of the cabinet sits at the pleasure of the Prime Minister. Every elected member of parliament sits there at the pleasure of their constituents. You see, this has been discussed all too goddamn often for us to be hearing the same old stories of discontent, which only regurgitates our abject ignorance or refusal to learn. It is not too long ago, there were all kinds of old talk about the sacked minister and corruption, with some GDB letter absolving him of any responsibility to the bank. Yet all, the newly contrived story is that that same minister called out corruption in the government among a select few cabinet ministers and was fired for that. You hear stupidness? The official word from the Prime Minister is that he lost confidence and trust in the individual and is that. But we're so fast and out of place that we always feel we have a right to know details because we elect them. This Prime Minister is not a jamet as the old nastiness that many of you have grown accustomed to. This Prime Minister is a man of second and third chances, as he exhibited in his private profession as a lawyer. He's a man of patience, but when he acts, he is decisive. This is a man who walked out on a thriving legal practice that he was majority shareholding partner of. Started his own practice, Mitchell & Co. And within the first year of his practice, a majority of clients from his former practice joined him. If this is not testimony of his professionalism, you tell me what is. You see, I love the moniker of being a loner and prefer to work alone always. I shall not compromise my standards to be a part of anything that would end messing with my emotions and tearing me away from my standards, which I guard jealously. You see, I make myself available for advice and consultancy, but to become integral to something that makes me a close-up witness or a participant to nonsense, far less to be absorbed by things and activities I do not share or support, that will never happen. I remind you several times of this truism. For God so loved the world that he never sent a committee. He sent his only begotten Son. You see, I take my cue from this, and I'm very aware, according to legend, that a camel is the result of the efforts of a committee, several people, in other words, charged with replicating a horse. You see what I mean? Collective responsibility is the domain of those who are prepared to tweak, compromise, and unite behind one decision. If you are not of that ilk, leave the people grouping alone. The other thing is, we know of people who feel the need to foist their inferior religious nonsense on others. And when they cannot have their way, seek to run off the mouth about a collective decision just because their religious nonsense has been correctly sidestepped. All of this is happening at a time when we are observing 186 years of emancipation. And according to a Trinidadian historian of note, Dr. David Mohammed, we need to graduate to liberation instead of mere emancipation. You see, the bonds that have been associated with this emancipation managuy to support a cosmetic consciousness, as it were, need to be smashed, and a real and genuine consciousness developed and embraced for our people to be truly free. We cannot operate on the European prescription of religion, which has proved all too often to be totally alien to our DNA as members of the African diaspora, evidenced by our failure to uphold time and time again. That is precisely why religion, as per the version inherited from the plantation system, continues to fail us. When we hear of rubbish happening around, look out for the perpetrators being all too religious. Karl Marx's point is well made about how religion is really some sort of opium of the people. Since emancipation, which graduated into national independence for most of our nation within the region, our people have had to follow a list of objectives and be loyal to an agenda that is oppressive in themselves, drafted by former enslavers and colonizers. And we have to conform to this document in the form of a national constitution. Total rubbish. That so-called freedom, only an illusion. You see, these mental chains and psychological warfare that we continue to be victims of hold us trapped and locked in the many cycles of self-destructive behaviors. Dr. David Mohammed, in a recent discussion on CNC3's The Morning Brew, said, quote, "Liberation is much more important than emancipation. Emancipation is something that is given to you. Liberation is something that you take. When former enslavers had a meeting and made a decision through an act of parliament to let you go, emancipation of 1838 resulted. Liberation, on the other hand, excuse me, is when we have a meeting and we decide that we are going to free ourselves. Unless our freedom comes through that pathway, then it cannot be qualified or determined to be freedom at all," unquote. What a pity that the decision to liberate ourselves on March 13th, 1979 turned into a contest of ego, guided by alien ideologies which proved a misfit for our very heritage. Our continued state of confusion is the deliberate result of our refusal as people to slam the bloody gate on all remnants of colonialism, imperialism, and the mental enslavement that we inflict on ourselves through our various social and educational systems. I called a young, bright nephew of mine, whom I would bounce things off from time to time, And when I asked him if he would agree that emancipation has been elusive to Caribbean people, his response was to die for. As my focus was on the Caribbean without realizing that he has a serious point, that it is not limited to Caribbean people alone, as emancipation is elusive to the world. Emancipation is interchangeably used with freedom as a concept eludes us all. For the benefit of this sharing, I shall restrict my focus to the Caribbean, especially as we all have similar colonial past that was fueled by the plantation system. Our choreographed, colonially infused education, coupled with religious indoctrination over the years, and since emancipation, has shown us up as a people devoid of any qualification to participate in Western-styled democracy. You see, there is a pull and a tug deep within our souls that cause us to fail time and time again. You see, democracy presupposes its participants are intelligent. And when this is not to be obtained, we will have the pappy-show and managuy that we participate in, with elements like the old nastiness emerging as leaders, as we all know where this ended. You see, so it's therefore no secret that emancipation has been elusive to Caribbean people. We need to focus on liberation instead, so we could free ourselves of the shackles that we still operate and function with in our minds. Folks, let's take a little break and we'll come back for segment 2 as we rise today with this particular sharing.
Eddie Frederick has got it all. Inspiration, motivation, great advice, and opinion pieces as only Eddie Frederick can deliver. Eddie Frederick has got it all.
This is EDDIE-FICATION, made possible by the efforts of the Center for Democracy and Good Governance, CDGG. The strength of views and opinions expressed during EDDIE-FICATION are not necessarily a reflection or representation of the sponsors and/or affiliates of this program.
The hurricane season is now upon us, so we as Caribbean people need to remember to think safety and be prepared. Avoid venturing outside during a storm or hurricane, especially if there are strong winds. Rooftops and other debris are often blown about and can cause great damage.
Oh, I am in this land. Look at how we've grown, how far we've run. 50 years we strong and more to come. Going higher. 50 years we're blessed with much fire. Still reaching for more. Going up, going up, up and up, going up, going up, going up, higher. Going higher. As we aspire, build up ourselves, put people together. Like
Frederick has got it all. Inspiration, motivation, great advice, and biting opinion pieces as only Eddie Frederick can deliver. Eddie Frederick has got it all.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Folks, as I say, we have a lot. It's going to be a historical perspective today, because I cannot understand how a nation, calling itself 50 years independent, don't have a clue about nothing. And you have teachers now advising students to drop history because that's a waste of time subject. No wonder the people are dumb. Who are these teachers encouraging students to drop history in school? Are they really genuine teachers? Are people who don't know their history bound to do what? Repeat it. History should be a compulsory subject in school. And I hope this transformative administration is going to see to it that it does not become an elective, but it becomes a serious subject that students must know. They must study it, especially Grenadian history. Folks, when I was growing up, I recall never hearing about emancipation, far less to recognize the day set aside for its observance. I always thought that we got the long August weekend for Karakou Regatta, but I was not the only one. A lot of people thought so. And then later on, Rainbow City Festival. Not even in our primary school years were we ever taught anything about slavery and the plantation system back then. As a mature man today, I am wondering, what were teachers back then thinking to not even make a mention to us about that? That tells you about the deep-rooted nature of our colonial brainwashing. Even our teachers were privy to the point where they did not teach us about our history. You see, before going into the actual subject matter in its directness, emancipation, and why it has been elusive to Caribbean people, I am happy to share the text of Emancipation and its attendant struggles, which is chapter 5 of my yet unpublished short history of Grenada titled, This is My Island. Folks, listen to this carefully. Up to 1783, virtually everybody in Britain, the government, the church, the commercial interests, and most of the public had enthusiastically supported the slave trade. The declining profitability of West Indian slavery now set in motion a reconsideration of the slavery issue from a political and moral point of view. As the 18th century drew to a close, so too did the West Indian slave trade. More and more people began to realize how evil a business slavery was. The Society of Friends in England, also called the Quakers, were among the first to condemn slavery. A movement in England, gallantly led by Wilberforce, spoke out too on the evils of slavery. In 1807, the British Parliament took the first important step towards the freedom of the Negroes by abolishing the slave trade. Grenada's slave population was at the time comparatively large, and this appeared to have caused no immediate anxiety to the colonists. However, the planters realized that before long, the abolition of slavery was bound to affect their interests. You see, after the abolition of slave trade in 1807, there was an influx of various missionary groups into Grenada. The missionaries who worked in Grenada and the other West Indian islands belonged to different denominations of Protestant Christianity. By the end of the 18th century, all the churches inspired by religious revival started missionary organizations in connection with improved conditions for the slaves. Reformist policy was a failure. The West Indian slaves had seen the potential of direct and violent action in the Haitian Revolution, and they were no longer willing to wait for emancipation from on high. Many slaves, in fact, believed that the British government had already decreed emancipation, but that freedom was being withheld by the plantation owners themselves. The West Indian Islands began to explode one by one. In 1808, there was a slave insurrection in British Guyana, BG, and in 1816, the slaves in Barbados revolted, claiming that the island belonged to them. This had a major impact in Grenada, which had been simmering quietly since Fedon's rebellion, with threatened outbreaks in 1802 and, of course, 1806. From October 1819, when the Slave Registry Act was passed by the Imperial Parliament, the Home Government gave much attention to the inclusion of grants of money for the temporal and spiritual welfare of slaves in Grenada. It was during this period that the establishment of churches and schools and the provision of clergymen were vigorously pursued to meet the needs of the local government. In 1823, there were 2 Anglican and 2 Roman Catholic churches, 3 Wesleyan chapels, and 11 schools, 6 of which were in St. George's, where a central school was established in the following year. The growth of churches continued, and 1830 may be termed a church building year in Grenada, for in that year no less than 4 churches were begun to be built. These were in St. Patrick, St. Andrews, David, and of course St. George. In 1832, the non-white inhabitants numbered 26,704, of whom 1,500 were free coloreds and 1,600 free blacks, with 23,604 slaves. On August 28, 1833, the Imperial Parliament passed an act declaring the slaves in the British Dominion to be free, with a view, however, to gradually preparing them for their new social conditions. £20 million was granted by the British government. The news was carefully received in the colony, and an act was passed to bring the decision or bill into effect from 1st August 1834. At midnight on 31st July 1834, nearly 750,000 men, women, and children in the British West Indies ceased to be slaves. By the Act of Emancipation passed by the British government, there was an agreed period of transition to full freedom. All apprentices were only able to earn wages or choose their own occupations after they had given about 40 hours of unpaid labor each week. You see, unlike some of the other British West Indian islands, emancipation was marked by orderly behavior in Grenada. This, Father Raymond de Vasse thought, must have been caused by the influence of a Roman Catholic priest who kept close to the slaves during the period leading up to emancipation. William Wilberforce will long be remembered for his tremendous task in securing the emancipation of slaves. In appreciation for his services, the Lower Cemetery in St. George's, Grenada, bears his name, the Wilberforce Cemetery. On 22nd of May 1838, complete emancipation of the slaves was celebrated in Grenada, and of course the West Indies. There were church services, and thousands of freed slaves dressed in their Sunday best hastened to their churches and chapels, which had been decked with flowers and green boughs and palms. The effect of emancipation was felt in many quarters in various ways. Not all of the free house slaves or domestics were pleased. However, the general feeling of joy and freedom of the freed slaves in the island overshadowed any ill feeling of the minority. Emancipation, and why it has been so elusive to Caribbean people. Folks, we need to focus on liberation instead, so we could free ourselves of the shackles we still operate and function with in our minds. Let's take another break and we come back for segment 3 of today's very, very interesting topic, which, of course, we observe 186 years of emancipation. If only it would have been 186 years of liberation, we would have been further along. Let's take a little break and we'll come right back.
Eddie Frederick has got it all. Inspiration, motivation, great advice, and biting opinion pieces as only Eddie Frederick can deliver. Eddie Frederick has got it all.
This is Edification, made possible by the efforts of the Center for Democracy and Good Governance, CDGG. The strength of views and opinions expressed during edification are not necessarily a reflection or representation of the sponsors and/or affiliates of this program.
The hurricane season is now upon us, so we as Caribbean people need to remember to take safety and be prepared. Avoid venturing outside during a storm or hurricane, especially if there are strong winds. Rooftops and other debris are often blown about and can cause great damage.
Oh, island in the sun. Look at how we've grown, how far we've run. 50 years we strong and more to come. More to come. More to come. I'm going higher. 50 years we're blessed with much fire. Still reaching for more. Going up, going up, going up, going up, going up, 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 higher.
Frederick has got it all. Inspiration, motivation, great advice, and biting opinion pieces as only Eddie Frederick can deliver. Eddie Frederick has got it all.
Wonderful, 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 folks. Pardon my cough. I have a tickling in my throat, unfortunately. Folks, welcome back. And for those of you just joining, I'd like to say thank you for joining. And not only thank you, but as soon as you get in, you have a command. Share, comment, like, love, and let's just interact as much as you usually do. It's history lessons today, folks. You see, the elusiveness of emancipation for Caribbean people can be attributed to several interconnected factors. Colonial legacy. You see, the Caribbean's history of colonialism socioeconomic structures designed to benefit the colonizers a whole 186 years on and continuing. The legacy of slavery and plantation economies left the region with significant inequalities that have been challenging to overcome in spite of Western design democratic values, which our cosmetic consciousness cause us to practice and defend to their total benefit. Economic dependency. The economies of many Caribbean nations remain heavily dependent on a narrow range of exports such as sugar, banana, tourism, and are vulnerable to global market fluctuations. This economic dependency hampers genuine economic independence and even development. Political instability. You see, many Caribbean nations have experienced political instability, including heavy corruption as practiced by unscrupulous individuals posing as politicians, authoritarianism, and coups. Instability undermines efforts at sustained development and genuine liberation. Globalization and neocolonialism. You see, modern economic practices and international relations often perpetuate neocolonial dynamics. The powerful nations and multinational corporations exert significant influence over Caribbean economies, limiting their autonomy. Agriculture is only talked about, while consumerism is pushed, and our people continue to go for microwave processed foods, which must be imported, while impacting their health negatively and filling the pockets of the sources of their manufacture. Social inequality. You see, the region grapples with social inequalities, including disparities in wealth, education, and opportunities. These inequalities are often along racial and ethnic lines, mirroring the divisions from the colonial era. What about debt and economic policies? Several Caribbean nations face significant debt burdens and are often subjected to structural adjustment programs by international financial institutions. These programs can impose austerity measures that hinder social and economic progress. We must also admit that many of these said Caribbean nations have been ruled by unscrupulous individuals over the years whose appetites for corruption have brought up the cost of doing business, while stymieing genuine growth and development of the people. We had a nastiness here from 1995 to 2022 for the most part, making manger popot with the economy. Climate vulnerability. You see, the Caribbean is highly vulnerable to natural disasters such as hurricanes, which have been known to devastate economies and infrastructure. Climate change exacerbates these vulnerabilities, making recovery and progress more difficult. 1 step forward, 5 steps backwards. Put in the mix unscrupulous politicians, pilfering the aid to enrich themselves, storing supplies in their garages and below their houses, while the people who are really in need have to go without. This has been Grenada's experience in the aftermath of the passage of Hurricane Ivan some 20 years ago. And you have all these nastinesses today coming out and trying to accuse the decent of doing what they did. Isn't that sad? What about migration and brain drain? High levels of migration to more developed countries result in a brain drain for the entire region, where the region loses many of its most educated and skilled individuals. The loss hinders local development and capacity building efforts. You see, folks, addressing these challenges requires comprehensive strategies that include economic diversification, regional cooperation, strengthening democratic institutions, and investing in education and social infrastructure. We need leaders who have the will, like the People's Revolutionary Government of 79 to 83, to carve its own path and ratchet up the rhetoric to put colonial remnants in their goddamn place. You see, Grenada's 50 years of national independence from Great Britain on February 7th, 1974, can be assessed in terms of various factors such as economic development, cosmetic political stability, social progress, and the continuation of the journey towards emancipation as against liberation. Let's look at economic development. Grenada has experienced periods of economic growth, particularly through tourism, agriculture, notably nutmeg and cocoa, and more recently, offshore education and services. You see, the economy has also faced challenges, including natural disasters like hurricanes and global economic downturns, which have impacted development and living standards, all apart from the pest, that old nastiness, expanding the underclass by turning them into perpetual poor and vulnerable people, just to place them on a vote farm, mashing up the whole, demographics of the society. Political stability and governance. Grenada has had a mixed record of political stability. The revolutionary period of 1979 to 83, ending, of course, with the US-led invasion, marks a turbulent chapter. Interestingly, it was the only period of our post-independence history that marked significant progress that mimicked a nation on its way to genuine self-reliance and independence. Put that in among your perfume. You see, however, since the crash of the said revolution, with the return of so-called democratic rule as prescribed by Western standards, with the return of so-called, I don't even know how to call it, because this Western standard managuy pappy-show nonsense. Our brainwashed nation has been fooled to think that the level of corruption and backwardness we functioned under between 95 and 2022, for the most part, represents relative political stability with democratic elections and governance structures. You see, politically, independence has been sold to us as permission to exercise greater self-determination, impacting national policies and international relations, as confined to the list of objectives designed by our former colonizers, called a constitution. You see, education and health, let's look at that. There have been no known significant improvements in education and health. And worse yet, under the longest period of any single administration, 23 years, and education almost disappeared. The people, you could see them on social media just exhibiting at free will, denseness left, right, and center. And don't talk about healthcare. It's like we stuck in the 70s. Same reasons the nurses downed tools in December of 1969, going into 70, are the same reasons existing today. How many years later? Could you imagine that? Could you imagine that? Literacy rates have increased during the period 79 to 83, but regressed alarmingly since the crash of the revolution. Even healthcare appears to have stood still, mimicking the inadequacies, as I said, of the 70s. even though Grenada is home to one of the world's leading medical universities. You see, despite limited progress, challenges remain in addressing poverty and inequality. Between 1995 and 2022, for the most part, poverty was choreographed by an administration led by an old nastiness, a visionless individual who ensured that he widened the underclass to qualify them for his vote farm, leaving the nation with a large swath of the population being vulnerable today. Within the last 2 years, efforts continue to be made to improve the socio-economic conditions of all citizens. You see, efforts to strengthen national identity and pride has been made in an effort to shore up national independence. You see, the celebration of cultural heritage and traditions has been vital in fostering a sense of unity and continuity of ideals towards genuine liberation. You see that legacy of slavery, folks? The journey towards full liberation from the legacy of slavery is ongoing. Independence has provided a platform for addressing historical injustices and promoting social equity. It would only take drastic revolutionary approaches to shake our people into a meaningful future that they deserve. You see, while Grenada's 50 years of independence have brought various benefits and advancements, the context of emancipation is complex and multifaceted. The nation continues to work towards fulfilling the promises of independence and emancipation, striving for economic prosperity, political stability at last, social equity, and cultural pride. You see, the benefits are evident, but intertwined with ongoing challenges that require continuous effort and dedication. We need to develop our people to the point where they can be able to self-manage and become great people. What we need as a body collective is common vision that is congruent with our leaders' vision for us to move forward as a truly liberated people. You see, that struggle bus that we have been stuck on for so long is because of the lack of visionary leadership. And so we continue to do the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome. Too many of our people graduate from school and universities, never touch a book again. That has to be mind-blowing indeed. After all, the world is changing at a fast rate. Yet for all, too many of our degreed citizens are prepared to remain stuck with obsolete knowledge that can no longer apply to life as they will come to know it. You see, if you are not reading, if you are not learning, if you're not gaining new mindset, you are being left behind by virtue of the fact that you are not changing. Life is leaving you behind. You see, emancipation and why it has been so elusive to Caribbean people. We really need to focus on liberation instead, so we could free ourselves of the shackles we still operate and function with in our minds. Folks, we come back with the last segment. So let's take a little break here.
Frederick has got it all. Inspiration, motivation, great advice, and biting opinion pieces as only Eddie Frederick can deliver. Eddie Frederick has got it all.
This is Edification, made possible by the efforts of the Center for Democracy and Good Governance, CDGG. The strength of views and opinions expressed during edification are not necessarily a reflection or representation of the sponsors and or affiliates of this program.
The hurricane season is now upon us, so we as Caribbean people need to remember to keep safety and be prepared. Avoid venturing outside during a storm or hurricane, especially if there are strong winds. Rooftops and other debris are often blown about and can cause great damage.
Going up, 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 up. Higher. Going higher. As we aspire, build up ourselves, put people together. Bang, bang, bang. Slowly up.
Eddie Frederick has got it all. Inspiration, motivation, advice, and biting opinion pieces as only Eddie Frederick can deliver. Eddie Frederick has got it all.
Wonderful, folks, wonderful. So let's just take in our final segment here for today on this Emancipation Weekend. And for those of you just joining, welcome, welcome. It's better to be late than dead on time. You ever heard that? So we're happy to have you. As soon as you get into the room, remember to share. And even after this program is finished, come on, keep sharing it, because you know what happens. You know, folks, have Caribbean people benefited from emancipation since 1838? You know, the simple answer to that is yes. But have we benefited enough? The simple answer to that is no. You see, Caribbean people have experienced various benefits from emancipation since 1838, but the impact has been limited, though complex and multifaceted. Had we been liberated, our story would have been different. Nonetheless, here are a few key points. You see, the most immediate benefit was the abolition of slavery, which granted freedom to formerly enslaved individuals. This allowed them to seek better living conditions, better education, and better economic opportunities within the confines, of course, of limits set by their former colonizers. What about land ownership? Emancipation was often accompanied by land grants or opportunities for land ownership. While many former enslaved people were unable to acquire land due to various barriers, some did manage to establish small farms and businesses. In our own case here in Grenada, many of our people ended up, to this day, owners of land, making us one of the envy of the region when it comes to land ownership. What about cultural identity? Emancipation allowed for the revival and perseverance of African cultural practices, languages, and traditions, contributing to a rich and diverse Caribbean identity today. Matter of fact, Carriacou is reputed for being the second country or region, landmass in the Caribbean, where you can find the rich traditions of West African customs being preserved, second only to Haiti in the entire Caribbean. Political activism. You see, the end of slavery laid the groundwork for political movements advocating for rights and representation. Over time, this led to increased political participation, the eventual development of independent nations in the Caribbean, all of which operate and function according to a set prescription of rights dictated by the former colonizers, which restrict meaningful progress for each nation. What about economic challenges? Despite these benefits, many Caribbean nations face significant economic challenges post-emancipation. You see, the transition from a slave-based economy to one that included free labor was difficult, leading to ongoing struggles with poverty and inequality. You see, this forms the bedrock for unscrupulous political talents to ease in and take advantage of the poor and vulnerable, as was witnessed firsthand here in Grenada between 1995 and 2022, for the most part, by that old nastiness. How about social dynamics? Emancipation altered social structures, leading to tensions and conflicts, but also opportunities for new social relationships across different racial and ethnic groups. Overall, you see, while emancipation brought some benefits, the subsequent development of Caribbean societies has been shaped by both the opportunities and challenges that arose from this historic change. You see, one can only imagine how much more could have been enjoyed had we fought for and taken our freedom as against depended on it to be decreed for us. But how could I end today's program without showing you the relationship between the labor movement and emancipation? You see, the emancipation of enslaved people in 1838, particularly in the British Caribbean, had significant implications for the labor movement. It would be more acceptable if we can hear the local labor movement raising its voice louder around this time of the year instead of around May Day alone, with their cosmetic consciousness, to use the term coined by Dr. David Mohammed. You see, Mohammed went on to describe the term as follows: it is an occasion that appears on our national calendar, just like Independence Day, Christmas Day, etc., and comes up once a year. Seasonal consciousness, that it is the right to say something as if it were actually contributing to liberation, unquote. Let's take a cursory look at some key benefits of emancipation to the labor movement at the same time. You see, increased workforce. The end of slavery meant that formerly enslaved individuals could enter the labor market. This increased the workforce and provided new opportunities for labor organizing. What about labor rights awareness? Emancipation raised awareness about workers' rights and the importance of fair wages and working conditions. It inspired both formerly enslaved individuals and free workers to advocate for their rights. What about formation of unions? With newfound freedom, many former slaves and other workers began to form unions and labor organizations, which were crucial in pushing for better labor conditions and rights. Political advocacy. The emancipation movement highlighted the need for political representation and rights, encouraging labor movements to seek political influence and advocate for legalization, or legislation rather, that would protect workers. What about solidarity across races? You see, emancipation fostered a sense of solidarity among workers of different backgrounds, as it created a common ground for fighting against oppression and exploitation. What about a shift in economic structures? The abolition of slavery prompted economic changes that required new labor dynamics, leading to the development of new industries and labor practices. You see, overall, the emancipation in 1838 laid the groundwork for a more organized and politically aware labor movement, as it encouraged former enslaved individuals and workers to fight for their rights and improve their working conditions. You see, certainly, the impact of emancipation in 1838 on the labor movement extended beyond immediate workforce changes and had long-lasting effects on society and labor rights. Here are some additional points to consider and to ponder. Formerly enslaved individuals gained the ability to negotiate wages and working conditions, which empowered them economically. This newfound independence allowed them to support their families and participate more actively in their communities. If they would only remain focused, they will not be derailed by the agenda of selfish, inferior politicians, and they could be further along. What about education and skill development? Emancipation led to increased efforts to educate former slaves. Access to education and skill development programs helped individuals improve their employability and engage in skilled labor, which was, of course, crucial to their economic advancement. Unfortunately, many have regressed over the years, especially during the period 95 to 2022 for the most part. when large swaths of the population were pushed into the underclass, behaving entitled and thus ending up mostly unemployable, crying out loudly about the lack of employment opportunities, when in truth and in fact they simply do not want to work. The abolition of slavery resulted in significant shifts in agricultural practices. Planters had to adapt to a paid labor system, which sometimes led to exploitative labor practices. This created a fertile ground for labor activism as workers sought to improve their conditions. In our own case, thus was born Eric Gary and his movement in 1949-1950, which championed their cause. What about the rise of labor leaders? You see, the period following emancipation saw the emergence of influential labor leaders and activists who championed workers' rights. These leaders played pivotal roles in organizing strikes, protests, and campaigns that aimed to improve labor conditions. What a pity they did not pay closer attention to the rules of engagement, which were written and directed by the colonials, which only gave them a semblance of success. You see, the emancipation movement inspired labor movements not only in the Caribbean, but also globally. Activists in other countries drew on the experiences of formerly enslaved individuals to advocate for labor rights and social justice. As the labor movement gained momentum, activists campaigned for legal protections for workers. This led to the establishment of labor laws and regulations that aimed to protect workers from exploitation and discrimination. Folks, cultural narratives surrounding emancipation and labor struggles contributed to a growing awareness of social justice issues. This helped to build a broader movement for human rights that transcended labor issues. You see, while emancipation marked a significant step forward, it was not the end of struggles for equity. Formerly enslaved individuals faced ongoing discrimination and economic challenges, which fueled continued activism and the fight for civil rights. In summary, the emancipation of 1838 ought to have provided a critical turning point for the labor movement by fostering economic independence, encouraging education, and inspiring a generation of activists dedicated to improving labor rights and conditions. It ought to have set the stage for ongoing struggles for equality and justice in the workforce and beyond. What a pity the labor movement throughout the region see themselves more as politicians as against true champions of the workers. If the intentions of the various labor leaders were genuine, the regional labor movement would have been a stronger force to be reckoned with, and workers would have benefited a lot more than the handicapped way they are led to believe that they are benefiting today. Folks, it was John Maxwell who said the best way to improve your life is to start living intentionally. When you live intentionally, you turn good intentions into good actions. Good intentions alone never helped anybody. Good intentions never changed the life. Good intentions are just what are good intentions. They are intentions that were never acted upon, so they're worthless. Intention living takes my intentions, what I would like to do, and turn them into actions, what I really do. You see, the issue of emancipation being something that is given to us follows through in many ways. In fact, over the years, we were told to get educated so that we can get a job, a good job. Several of us therefore went out and got educated to seek work, never to start up our own stuff. The few of us who were brave enough to do so have been pressured by many of our own race to go and get a real job. The fact that we finished college as a chemical engineer, mechanical engineer, and what have you. And all we know how to do is to write an application with a CV, I hereby apply. We never think about returning to invest in or develop anything, but instead, happy to look for a job. There is nothing new around us that any of us developed to put on our shelves for sale. We love embellishing our CVs with all sorts of nonsense about I work well under pressure, willing to learn and easy to teach, positive attitude, etc., etc. When we start to think of ourselves as liberated as against emancipated, they will do something about our lot in life. You see, our lack of understanding over the years as to the true meaning of emancipation informs the cavalier manner in which we celebrate it annually. Dr. Muhammad is correct when he referred to our behavior towards it as cosmetic consciousness. Inasmuch as we are not able to satisfy the hunger of the poor among us, the way our society has been constructed over the years since emancipation, we just could never satisfy the greed of the rich. I am glad that over the years I invested in the qualities within me that started my own thing to the point where I cannot be fired by anyone. I work alone, and the type of work I do requires love and dedication to be able to do it and be successful at what I do. I thank God for the number of clients who have used my services over the years and found satisfaction with the results that they have secured for their teams. I am happy too at the private outreach I offer to select individuals who have been able to tap into my selflessness to benefit professionally and grow their lives through meaningful mentorship. You see, because of the power and spirit of discernment, I am able to understand and appreciate that not everybody I have helped will be grateful as they ought to be. I am contented to take each as they come. I am as matter-of-factly as they come and always ready to move on. Folks, as I close today, I cannot help but lament that it is unfortunate when genuinely humble people are perceived to be arrogant. That annoys the dickens out of me. But you see, this kind of misunderstanding can stem from various sources, such as miscommunication, preconceived notions, or even plain old jealousy. I sure trust that I have shared here today enough to create for you a better understanding of emancipation and why we should endeavor to become liberated instead, for fear that emancipation will continue to be elusive to all of us as Caribbean people. Folks, I am in, I am out, and I am gone. Thanks for joining. Continue to share. See you next week at the same time, same place for more extraordinary programming. Until then, stay safe, stay well, remain vigilant, and lifted. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. Just type in my name, Edward or Eddie Frederick. Subscribe, like, and share. And be prepared to receive your mental multivitamins as straight up as I deliver them. Tomorrow is that official holiday marking our 186th year of emancipation, which really should be liberation. But be that as it may, I have given you enough food for thought. Peace and blessings to you all, folks. Enjoy the rest of your week. Cheers, cheers, cheers.
Eddie Frederick has got it all. Inspiration, motivation, great advice, and biting opinion pieces as only Eddie Frederick can deliver. Eddie Frederick has got it all.
This has been Edification, made possible by the efforts of the Center for Democracy and Good Governance, CDGG. The Center for Democracy and Good Governance is a sound organization established to promote and strengthen democracy. For too long now, our generally perceived poorly educated electorate have fallen victim to the cheap and inferior propaganda of those seeking to hold others captive under the guise of democracy. Gladly, the CDGG uses edification to help to actively pursue a sustainable approach to reorient our people towards the importance of electing and selecting people of good character to public life. Through edification, we will highlight the importance of education appropriate to our development, proper health care and facilities as our right, respect for law and order, not to mention upgrading our people's thinking so they could become qualified participants in the democratic process to their advantage. After all, Grenada's national constitution makes allowances for the ideal of free men to enjoy freedom from fear and want, which can be best achieved if conditions are created whereby everyone may enjoy his economic, social and political, civil and cultural rights.
I want the best for my family, so every meal has to be perfect. Every bite has to say, There's no doubt in my mind that the best in frozen meats and vegetables has to come from the country cold store. Hams, turkeys, sausages, beef, pork, chicken. I just don't know my family is in safe hands. Thank you, country cold store, for being there for us for the past 40 years.
There are some interesting specials available at Control Stores Mini Mart while stocks last. Take advantage of these specials as they assist you to stretch your limited funds.
The Country Cold Store, providing the best in frozen meats and vegetables since 1969.
The hurricane season is now upon us, so we as Caribbean people need to remember to bake safety and be prepared. Avoid venturing outside during a storm or hurricane, especially if there are strong winds. Rooftops and other debris are often blown about and can cause great damage.
Attention all forward-thinking companies. Sure, you can do with a continuous positive boost to your image and impact your bottom line. Hiring the right people with the right attitude and mindset is where to start. Even if you did not get it right through your current hiring methods, we can help develop the right mindset for your current employees. If you think training is expensive, try not training and you will experience a perpetual downward spiral in patronage on account of increased dissatisfied customers. Take things into your hands and engage the best at motivation and customer care training with a tried and tested track record. Visit www.efrederick.com now and learn how you can change the atmosphere in your business and improve the customer experience for everyone who does business with you. Spice Island Beach Resort and Belmont Estate are two such local entities of world renown that have benefited tremendously from ongoing customer care, social skills and motivation training. Training changes everything for the better for any business and every team member. Enhance employee performance through increased awareness and passion for the job at hand. Greater potential in your workforce awaits you through engaged, high-energy training that works. Log on now, www.efrederick.com.
Eddie Frederick has got it all. Inspiration, motivation, great advice, and biting opinion pieces as only Eddie Frederick can deliver. Eddie Frederick has got it all.
Take time and I write down all the things that I love on my island. Best believe the list gon' be like 5 miles long. Best believe it's love that makes me sing this song. The cleanest breeze on the waters. Friendly people meet in every corner. Togetherness and love is what we stand for. We stand for. Stand for.
Oh, island in the sun. Look at how we've grown out from the front. 50 years we strong and more to come. More to come. More to come.